This leadership mini-series is kindly sponsored by Minerva. Minerva is an executive search firm that works primarily with higher education clients to develop outstanding teams, cultures and structures. Minerva supports universities in making senior executive appointments across academic and professional services roles and in recruiting to non-executive and interim positions. Minerva's consultants also help individuals in the sector and outside find their best path through a career in the sector. Since 2020, 5 cohorts have passed through Minerva's Emerging Leaders programme that works with people in a critical development stage of their leadership and management careers, including heads, deans, deputies and directors. Minerva also runs Aspire, a pro bono leadership development programme to help maximise opportunities for talented minority ethnic professionals to enrich their careers, and Board Prospects, an initiative to provide people from underrepresented backgrounds with experience of governance. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is Professor Pip Beard, Professor of Viral Pathology and Head of the School of Life Sciences at Keele University. Pip took up her post as Head of School following the initial part of her career in practice and subsequently in research institutes, and she continues to hold a national and international government advisory role in her professional field. In this episode, Pip reflects upon taking up a Head of School role and how she has found the first 2 years in post. She considers the value of leadership development programmes she undertook prior to her university appointment and reflects upon how she's found the transition of parking much of her research activity while she leads the school. We also discuss how she's navigated being a female leader in various male-dominated environments. Pip, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being my guest in this episode. You're Head of the School of Life Sciences and Professor of Viral Pathology at Keele University. Can you tell us a bit more about what your role as Head of School involves?
It's a very broad role, very broad. My sort of job description summary would say that I've got responsibility for all aspects of leadership and management of the school. And the School of Life Sciences at Keele has got about 100 academics, and about 60 of them are on the research track. So they lead their own research team. And then the other 40 are on the scholarship track. So their focus is more on teaching. And we have about 1,600 students at the moment. So as Head of School, I've got responsibility for academic outputs. So are we doing the right research and are we doing it in the right way? And are we teaching the students the right thing or are we teaching it in the right way? I've also got responsibility for kind of what I call people leadership. So are people being line managed effectively? Do they have career progression? Are they being enabled to take advantage of opportunities? Is their well-being okay? Equality, diversity, inclusivity, all of those things. And then I also need to represent the school. That's sort of internally and externally. So I just need to lobby for the school. I need to promote it and all of those kinds of things. And then I kind of think those are sort of the 3 sort of day-to-day things. And then overarching, I've got responsibility for school strategy. So making sure that our overall direction of travel is the right one. It's aligned with the rest of the university. It's taking advantage of all those external forces and things like that. And then also governance is a big one. So are we complying with the rules? Health and safety, ethics, risk management, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, it's quite a broad role.
Your academic background stems back to gaining a first-class honours degree in veterinary science, followed by a PhD, and you've held a number of posts since that time. Can you step us through your career path so far, including any twists and turns, through to the Head of School role that you hold today?
I think it's just one twist and one turn after another, to be honest. So Yes, I did my vet degree in Sydney, and I always wanted to be a vet. Didn't really have any other option, and so was really pleased I got into vet school, and I loved being in vet school. And then once I graduated, I went to practice in North Yorkshire, so working with companion and farm animals. And then I had the opportunity to do a PhD at the Morden Research Institute, which is up in Edinburgh. I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to do research as a career, because I really did enjoy being a vet in practice. But it was a great opportunity. I didn't want to pass it up. And so I went along up to Edinburgh and loved it, had a great time. It was a great PhD, really fitted with my area of interest. And it was quite a vetty PhD, so it was a good segue from veterinary practice into research. So I moved from there to North America and did a postdoctoral position there at Cornell University in upstate New York. And that was in herpes viruses. And then I moved from Cornell back to the UK. I went to London to Imperial College to do a Wellcome Trust fellowship. And that was in pox viruses. And I've kind of stuck with pox viruses ever since then. I then moved to Mongolia and worked for the Mongolian government, looking at the sort of veterinary issues that they have in Mongolia, looking at their veterinary laboratories in particular. And then moved to the University of Edinburgh, to the Roslin Institute. And that's when I started to run my own research group. So I became a principal investigator, again, looking at pox viruses. And from there, I moved down to the Pirbright Institute, which is on the outskirts of London. And I was sort of recruited down there to develop and run their pox virus research group with a focus on veterinary pox viruses, the pox viruses that affect animals. So I ran quite a big research group down there, sort of 10 to 15 scientists, and was particularly involved in the lumpy skin disease epidemic that has been happening in recent years, really nasty pox virus that causes disease of cattle. And it's kind of spread from Africa out into Asia and into Europe. And then from Pirbright, I moved to Keele. So that was when I moved about 2 years ago to become head of school.
Picking up on what you've just said there, I mean, you clearly have a substantial national and international research presence in your field. What was the motivation to also developing your leadership presence? And have you seen those research and leadership paths as being distinct, or are they complementary?
I definitely think leadership is a skill, and I think it's one that you learn as well. I don't think people are born leaders. You need to learn to be a leader. And I definitely tried hard to do that alongside developing my skills as a veterinary pathologist and as a virologist. I've tried to develop my skills as a leader. I always love a good leadership course. And I was lucky to be able to do a diploma of management really pretty early in my career when I was doing my Wellcome Trust fellowship. And that was brilliant. And I still use the things that I learned in that course. I still use them today. It was one of those sort of 8 days scattered over a year kind of thing. I kind of think of it as Leadership 101. It just gave you the fundamental basics. It was brilliant. Since then, I've had further opportunities to do more leadership courses and also leadership coaching. I'm a big fan of leadership coaching. I've had some great coaches that have really helped me develop and sort of expand my leadership skills. And yeah, I think learning to be a leader definitely helped me as a researcher, particularly to be a sort of principal investigator. It's helped me to do things like choosing the right strategic direction for my group, being able to develop the people in my group, things like that. So they're definitely two complementary skills for sure. Being a leader really has enabled me to be a better researcher.
You talked at the start about the head of school role, and you know there was so much that you talked about there in terms of what you do. I imagine it's quite a juggling act. You've got the school's activities, you're part of a bigger faculty, there's the governances and finances to oversee, and I imagine there's a number of institution-wide change projects going on as part of the university's strategy. How did you find balancing all of those aspects in the first few months? And to what extent did the role align with what you anticipated, especially being newly coming into the university?
Yeah, that's not only newly coming into the university, but sort of new to universities, because I'd been in research institutes previously. So it was a big step up for me from running my really specialised poxvirus research group to suddenly being a head of school in a university. I had a lot to learn, and especially in those first few months, amazing support from my senior team within the school, particularly my director of research, director of education, and my faculty operations manager. They have just been so patient with me, and really generous when they're sharing their expertise and their knowledge. And when I ask the same question 3 times in a row, they still are very patient with me. Balance, I think, is the key word for me. So, for example, I'm quite comfortable with the research side of things. I've got that, strong track record in research, so I'm very happy to lead in that area. But when I started, I had a lot to learn on the teaching side of things, and I'm lucky that Keele as an institution is really strong in its teaching and scholarship. It's got a genuinely student-focused approach to everything it does. We've just been awarded a gold award in our teaching excellence framework, so that makes it 2 gold awards in a row for us. And that makes Keele a really good environment for me to learn about teaching, to learn about sort of innovative, high-quality scholarship and things like that. So it was a really good match for me. What I lacked, Keele could very easily provide. I think as head of school, probably the biggest day-to-day difference is everything is just quicker and bigger. I have to be sort of a different person in different meetings multiple times during that day. I don't have sort of one day doing teaching, one day doing research. I have to do different things every hour. I have to be a different person. I have to quickly changing onto different tracks and dealing with different issues. And the problems are trickier. Also, I found that when I became the head of school, if it was a simple problem or if it was easy to solve, someone would have done it before it gets to me as head of school. So I tend to only see the really good things or the really bad things. I don't get to see the things in the middle so much. So I think those were the things that struck me sort of in those early months.
And was it what you expected it to be? I mean, you talked there about the bandwidth of having to be a different person in different settings. Is that what you thought it was going to be?
I think I came with very little expectation, which is probably a good thing. I think I came with the expectation that it was going to be a challenge and it was going to be very different to everything that I'd done before. And I think that helped me. That lack of expectation, I think that made it easier. I think it is a big job. And you're right, I don't think I had appreciated how many different things every day you walk into your office. I don't think I'd quite realised the breadth of things that you deal with and how quickly they change. Yeah.
And if you've got all of those things going on in your head at the same time, how do you, I guess, get those out of your head in terms of when you go out of the office or when you get home? What's your approach to downtime?
I think you get better at it. So I'm just back from holidays at the moment, and I can feel myself being slow. I've not got back up to speed yet. So I think you learn, you get into the groove, so to speak, and you're able to do those quick changes and to move from one meeting to the next and from one issue to the next. And it's going to take me another couple of days, I think. It's always like this when I come back from holidays. I sit here and think, oh my goodness, how did I do this? Downtime, definitely having family and friends and having things to do outside work, making sure that you don't just go home and sit and mull over everything as you eat your dinner. Make sure there's different things for you to do. Exercise is super important, and I make sure I've got lots of exercise. I do lots of cycling, so bike riding, not very fast. I'm not very good at it, but I find that is a really nice sort of relaxing way. So I also I had a really good tip from it was actually on one of my leadership courses. The speaker was saying that every 8 weeks, make sure you have at least a long weekend. So make sure minimum of 8 weeks you're doing something which is going away. It's not just having a staycation, but it's doing something, and it's more than just the weekend. Pop either a Friday or a Monday on there as well. So it really is a proper break, and that's been brilliant. That has really definitely helped to really stop and give your brain a bit of a break.
Before taking on the head of school role, as you mentioned, you'd led in other settings and you'd also undertaken various leadership development programs. How would you say those earlier experiences supported you in taking on the head of school role? And what aspects of your leadership style have stayed the same or have evolved since being in post?
The core values haven't changed. So regardless of what leadership role you're in, my sort of core values have stayed the same. So there's always that central bit which never changes, and it goes with you from every job to job. I think the people skills are probably similar as well, but they're just at a different level as you move up to more senior positions. I think the biggest change for me has been the strategic leadership. That's been the biggest difference, and I've had to evolve my skills in this area in particular. I'm lucky to have been on some leadership courses with Minerva and with the Windsor Leadership Trust that both had a really strong emphasis on strategy. Also had recommendations to some great books. Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is really good. I'm sure you'll know that one, Richard Rummelt. And I also got this great big textbook called Exploring Strategy by Whittington and other authors. And that just covers everything. So every time I'm not sure what's going on, I know that there'll be something in the index of that book that'll help me. So that's really helped.
We talked earlier about your substantial national and international research presence, and alongside your head of school role, you have continued to have roles in advising UK and international government bodies. One of the dilemmas for academic colleagues contemplating leadership roles is less time for their own academic pursuits. How did you approach that context when you were contemplating applying for the head of school role, and how have things worked out for you in practice?
Yeah, this was definitely a key issue for me when I moved to Keele and took on the head of school role, because I hadn't seen anyone successfully take on both a complex leadership role and run their own big research team. There wasn't a role model for me to aim towards, and it made me think that actually it's just not possible to do both of them, and you just end up doing one or both badly, and it's sort of bad for. And this is particularly true for me because some of my research involves high containment work. So you just don't have the option of doing that badly. So the model I pitched when I interviewed at Keele was that I wouldn't do my research. I'd put my research on ice while I was being the head of school, and I would put all of my focus into that head of school role. And I'd make sure that the academics in my school were being well supported and they were being well guided and that they were being signposted to opportunities and things like that, rather than doing that and trying to get my PhD students through their fivers and make sure my postdocs were all right and writing my own grants and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't do that sort of personal research. I would just do leading the school. And I've arranged it so that I'm assessed on the performance of the school as a whole, but not on my research outcomes. And Keele were pretty happy with it. I think 2 years down the track, I think they're still pretty happy with it. But it was definitely would I still be happy if I wasn't doing my own research? That was the question that I just didn't know the answer to. And I don't think you would know the answer until you try.
But I guess you felt it was a point in your career where you wanted to do something different. Is that what motivated you to move into that head of school role?
Yes, I did. I did feel, so I'd seen sort of bad decisions and bad strategic choices by other leaders as you go through your career. And there's a point where you have to, put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. If you think you can do better, well, go on, see if you can do better. So this is sort of my opportunity to see, particularly I wanted to lead with my values. I definitely think sort of a value-centered leadership is really important. So I wanted to see if I could be a successful leader using that kind of a model.
You're a strong advocate for gender equality within the leadership of the veterinary science profession, for women in science more broadly, and in the leadership of higher education. Hearing what you've achieved in your own career so far, I mean, you'll be a role model for many people, but in being a role model, it's quite easy for others to assume that things have always been plain sailing for you. And I imagine that's not necessarily the case. What have been some of the challenges you've experienced as a female in your career so far? And from where have you found resilience?
Definitely, it's a big issue in biological sciences and veterinary sciences, sort of my area, the role of women in gender equality. we have a lot of women who enter both biological sciences and veterinary sciences. It's predominantly women, quite substantially predominantly women, and it has been for decades. But if you look at the leadership in the field, it's predominantly men, very predominantly men. So we've got obviously no trouble in attracting women to this particular career path, but then we've got this leaky pipeline. Women don't then stay to reach these senior leadership roles. Whereas men, we don't have so many men, but it's sometimes referred to as the glass escalator. They're fast-tracked into leadership positions. So the question is, why are we in this situation? Why aren't women able to access these leadership roles? There's a great book which looks at women in leadership. It's called Through the Labyrinth. It's by Professor Alice Eagley and Dr. Linda Carley. And it's a few years old now, but it's really good, really evidence-based and super easy to read. And it has this metaphor of the labyrinth. They argue that it's not a glass ceiling because you can actually get through. There are some women who do make it to senior leadership positions. So it's not a ceiling, but it's more like a labyrinth. It's this maze that you have to work your way through, and it's tricky, and the way forward isn't always clear. There's not one path. There are numerous paths and different barriers for different women. So I think it's a much better analogy for the challenges of being a woman and reaching these leadership positions and then being a successful leader.
And what did that labyrinth look like for you? Were there certain points at which it felt difficult to move to the next phase?
I wouldn't say there was any particular time where I thought, wow, that's a real block. But I definitely found it easier as a PhD student and a postdoc to merrily continue on your track. And it wasn't until I became a group leader and started in those positions that I started to think, well, hang on a minute. If I was a man, you wouldn't have said that to me. And you know, that kind of thing. I have a very masculine name, so Pip Beard. If you don't know me, then you could well assume that I'm a man. And it was quite obvious that some people via email were just assuming because I was Dr. Beard or now Professor Beard, that the assumption is that you're just a man and things like that. So those things sort of, I'd say those micro, they're called microaggressions. So not so much the really obvious misogyny or the really obvious sexism, but more the sort of smaller things that sort of just chip away. Yeah.
And with that sort of chipping away feeling, how did you respond to that? I mean, were they things that annoyed you? How did you find your sort of resilience in relation to those situations?
I think having a different approach to every situation. Sometimes you're best just to sit there and think, I'm going to come back to that. I'm not going to say anything right now. I'm going to go away, think about this, maybe take some advice, but then I'm going to be following up on this. Sometimes it's good just to call it out right there and then. One of the things I've started to do more on is making sure that there's gender equality when it comes to conferences. So if I'm invited to conferences now, I will only go if there's at least 35% female speakers. In a few years, I'm going to increase that to 40%. So if I'm invited, then I'll say, well, what's your gender balance look like? Because before I can accept, I need to know that. And if I find the gender balance is not right, then I'll signpost the conference organisers to how they can make sure that it is balanced. I'll say, I can't speak at your conference this time, but maybe next year. Here's a few things that you can do that can make sure that you've got a more balanced speaker lineup, and then I'd be happy to speak then. So sometimes sort of the direct approach is the one to go for. Sometimes the think about it and come back. I'm a great fan of the Athena Swan framework. That's the UK framework to support gender equality in universities. And I definitely use, we've just been awarded a silver award, which is great. And I think that has helped raise the profile of gender equality in higher education. It's given more tools for people to use. It's created space for people to talk about it, to identify solutions, to share best practices, all of that kind of thing. So I think that's always a really good, lots of useful information on their website as well.
And what are your reflections about the challenges that still exist for female leaders in higher education, and how should we be responding to that?
I mean, the problem of leadership and the problems that women face in leadership, it's not just in higher education, it's broadly throughout society. definitely, I think one of the key barriers that maybe in a higher education is quite traditional in some ways. So you come up against this traditional stereotype of agentic leadership. So this assertive, decisive leadership is more traditionally associated with men, and women like me. So I'm more naturally agentic. You end up with this mismatch. So you're matching the leadership style because you're being assertive and decisive, but actually that's not the stereotype of women. So you're working against the stereotype. So that can lead to difficulties. Women are more often associated with the communal manner. But that's not the traditional leadership style. So if you're communal, then you're matching your female stereotype, so everyone's content with that. But actually, you're not really being a leader because you're not being assertive and aggressive. So you've got that challenge, which is a really tricky one to kind of weave your way around. We're sort of back to the labyrinth metaphor. You've got to, appreciate the difficulties that face women in leadership that don't face men.
The higher education setting is hugely demanding at the moment, particularly in the current financial climate. What measures do you think the sector should be taking to support the development of academic leaders, both present and of the future? And what attributes do you think leaders will need into the medium term?
One of the things I'm working with in the school is to encourage people to be content with change. You're right. It is a time of massive change in higher education at the moment. And I don't think that rate of change is going to decrease either. I think we're now in a period where it's just going to be just very rapidly changing. So I've sort of suggested to my school that we need to work to be comfortable with change. We need to concentrate on the decision making within that changing environment, making sure that we're making good decisions, and that we're being agile, and that we're taking advantage of opportunities that pop up and things like that. Wanting to go back to the way things were, that's not an option, and I don't know that it will ever be an option. We're always going to need to be much more versatile and take advantage of change rather than worry about the changing environment that we're in. I think we also need to make sure that we change in a good way, that we identify the skills that we need in a society, because that's definitely changing. We've got rapidly changing technology. We've got climate change challenges. We've got a different age structure in society. All of these things are driving that change. So we need to make sure that we are giving our students the skills that they need to meet these challenges, and also that we're doing the research that is focused on those particular challenges. And I think we also need to work more closely with government. That obviously wasn't going very well in recent history, but we're in a much better place now than we were 6 to 9 months ago now. Yeah, I think what higher education needs from government is just some very clear messaging and some consistent messaging, and we're beginning to get that now. So I think that's a real positive step in the right direction.
You've reached the position of being a head of school. Is that the pinnacle of your own leadership development, or is leadership still a learning process for you?
Oh, still learning. Always be learning. I'll be learning until my last day in office, I think. It's just fascinating. Leadership as a sort of a field of study is really fascinating, ever changing. It's really powerful. There's always new ideas, new models, new tools, new ways of doing things coming out. I'm in the foothills of leadership, I would say, at the moment. There's tons more for me to learn.
Pip, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Job Shadowing HE was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more information about her consultancy work at susanamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.